Hi there, thanks for joining me on Rethink Real Estate for Good. I'm Eve Picker, and I'm on a mission to make real estate work for everyone. I love real estate. Real estate makes places good or bad, rich or poor, beautiful or not. In this show, I'm interviewing the disruptors, those creative thinkers and doers that are shrugging off the status quo in order to build better for everyone. And speaking of building better, I'm very excited to share that my company, Small Change, is now raising capital through a community round that is open to the public. Small Change is a leading equity crowdfunding platform for impact investment in real estate. For as little as $250, anyone 18 and over can invest in Small Change, helping to fuel our growth as we disrupt the old boys club of capital that routinely ignores so many qualified people and projects. Please visit wefunder.com/smallchange to review the full details of our raise and to make an investment if you can. And remember, investing is risky. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose. Necessity is the mother of invention. In 2019, Dafna Kaplan embarked upon a journey to uncover the obstacles preventing true construction innovation from widespread adoption. Extensive research and development led her to launch Cassette. In 2022, Cassette introduced a beautifully designed one-bedroom apartment pod that can stack up to 6 stories high into a multifamily development. Dafna's commitment is simple and straightforward. Deliver one manufactured product exceptionally well, improve that product's performance and features over time, and with that discipline and repetition, reverse the cost escalation in housing construction. In 2020, Dafna received the Presidential Award from the Los Angeles chapter of the American Institute of Architects for her work at Cassette, addressing the housing crisis. Listen in to be inspired. If you'd like to join me in my quest to rethink real estate, there are 2 simple things you can do. Share this podcast and go to rethinkrealestateforgood.co, where you can subscribe to be the first to hear about my podcasts, blog posts, and other goodies. Hi, Dafna. I'm really excited to talk with you today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Eve.
The tagline on your website says, accelerating construction, 1,000 homes at a time. Tell me about that.
Sure. Actually, I appreciate you reminding me what it says. It's been a long time since I've been on my own website. That's
It's a great tagline.
It's really connected to, in some ways, how we started the business, which was this observation that there was a lot of interest in construction, especially in housing, toward utilizing what we know works in manufacturing. So there's a lot of adoption of prefabrication and manufacturing construction in the form of things like what we do, modular. But there's also this, what seemed to be a lack of understanding in the real estate and construction world, that part of what really makes manufacturing efficient is this ability to run at scale. And so while your project might be 15 units of housing or even 100 units of housing, when you're thinking about efficiencies that come from manufacturing, it's really in the thousands, or it needs to be thought about in the thousands to really capture the efficiency and more important, the process improvement that you get from doing the same thing over and over and over again.
That makes sense. Although, it's the same problem with the missing middle housing, right? That's almost too small to build efficiently, which is why there's so little of it. Tell me about the company. When did you found it? How young is it?
Yeah, sure. And as long as you get back to that missing middle, because that's a big part of, I think, why we're doing that.
Oh, we can get back to it right now. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I agree. Most of those projects are too small to gain any kind of efficiency, but that is part of the purpose of how we're looking at the business of creating the housing as a product and at least a componentized part of that project that we could repeat over, say, 100 different projects, so that your project of maybe 10 units, at least half of the cost of your project might be able to be encapsulated in this manufactured item that is getting cheaper over time, like your television set, as opposed to getting more expensive every year. And so if we can capture a big chunk of your project and then aggregate that savings for a bunch of developers like you, then we have the potential at scale to really reduce the cost of housing.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how long have you been in business?
So in business, we actually formed and raised a little bit of friend and family capital to launch in early 2020, concurrent with the pandemic launching.
Perfect timing.
And that set in motion a beautiful series of pivots that I'd say every founder launches at the wrong time for some reason or another, and at the right time for some reason or another. So we formed the business, and as soon as the pandemic hit, we saw it as an opportunity to do two things. One, to start just consulting and taking everything we had learned and understood about modular housing and modular construction and start doing feasibility studies for developers while we were doubling down on our actual product design and engineering. So we spent the last couple of years really focused on designing a best-in-class structural system that could go together very quickly on site and could be very easy to understand for the trades that have to interface with that object when it comes to the site to get the design finished. And so we launched that product, which is not only a structural system, it's an entire finished one-bedroom apartment. This one designed by Hodgetts and Fung, an incredible design duo in California. And we launched that in late October last year.
So it took a while. Yeah, I saw the first cassette home you rolled out, the pod, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I want to move right in.
Thank you. Same here.
I'm wondering where you're shipping it to at this point. Let's start with how big it is and what it looks like, finishes and windows and.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, it was designed by a duo in California named Hodgetts and Fung, Craig Hodgetts and Ming Fung. They're pretty well-known architects, but they have a lesser known history in industrial design. They actually had two modular patents. So unbeknownst to us, before we met up and started chatting with them about a year ago, they'd been passionate about this idea of industrializing great design. And we sort of landed on this idea and an alignment that, just like Target in the 90s hired Michael Graves, a famous architect, to design your teapot for $20,
Right.
if you can really leverage manufacturing to do this at scale, there's no reason you can't have great design. And so they took this roughly 600 square foot structure that we had, and they really made it sing from a livability standpoint. If you had 600 feet that was about 14 and a half feet wide and 43 feet long to live in, what would be the best version of that to live in?
And so, what is the best version of that? Just how would you describe it?
Well, because of the structure, one of the real benefits of this unit is that we have a wall-to-wall window system on the front of the unit. So about a 14-foot wide floor-to-ceiling window system. And on most applications, that will be a window system with a couple of operable windows. A developer does have the option to get a sliding door system and to hang a balcony off of that unit.
Right.
That's sort of you see it the moment you walk in the door, you see that the end of the unit is just this giant, beautiful opening.
It always makes space feel so much bigger when there's light.
Yeah, and then a gorgeous sort of compact but luxurious cooking kitchen, because both Ming and I love to cook, and I think a kitchen makes a great home. And then between the bathroom, which is immediately off the door, and the living room is a bedroom that completely opens up with a 3-panel Hefele slider door. And the thinking behind that was that 80% of renters are 1- and 2-person households. We imagine that most of the time that bedroom would be open. And so why make it a small door? Why not just open that entire wall so that your hallway doesn't feel like a hallway?
Nice. And again, anyone who's listening should go check it out because it really is gorgeous. So it's a pod, and how can it be used? You talked about, someone who might use 10 of them. I mean, how can they be put together?
Yeah, the design of the unit was really made for the business to business market. It was made for a real estate developer of any size who wants to deliver housing really quickly, to be able to stack it up to 6 stories high in multiple kinds of configurations. The constraints are really how it connects, which is at the corners. So it is a bit rigorous in terms of a grid, but you could do a building with a single loaded corridor on the outside, or you could do, if you have enough space, they're long units, you could do a double loaded. And the unit comes with the structural support brackets to hold up that corridor or to hold up a balcony on the other side.
So if someone purchases like 10 of these units and they're going to make a 5-story building with 2 units on each floor, do they build the common areas and then these pods slot in? Or do you provide, or are you hoping to provide, staircase pods as well?
Someday we would provide the staircase pods. At this point, I think what our interest is, how can you make a product that is the same every time so that, as we discussed, like, what is the minimum chunk of a building you could replicate and not have it change between buildings? And so often the common areas and the stairs and the amenity spaces are the things you really want to customize. But there's only so many ways to design a 600 square foot apartment. And most architects will accept that because we hired a great architect to design the inside of that, they don't need to revisit that. And so we are only going to prescribe the apartment part and then give you multiple options for how you can configure that as an architect on the site.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, you will have to add the corridors. Yes, you'll have to add a staircase. There are many miscellaneous metals companies that will prefab a stair pod. That's not something that you need, a special company to do.
Right. Fascinating.
To help visualize the way they connect together, they don't slide in. They actually stack like Lego bricks. So the beauty of our particular system and the way we designed it, and the benefit of those 2 years in a pandemic, is that we got ourselves to a system where you don't even need to weld it or bolt it together. It literally just stacks on top of each other until you're at the top of the building. And then we tension a cable down the columns. It's a vertically post-tension connection.
I'm going to ask questions I hadn't planned now because I'm wondering what that's like to get through building permitting and if that's going to vary from state to state. Where are you targeting for your rollout?
Yeah, we are based in California, and while it may have been easier to design a system for Texas or for any other place in the country, housing is not only deeply needed in California, it's the entire West Coast. And what makes the West Coast difficult for modular structurally is the seismicity of the West Coast. And so we felt like the greatest need was here, and steel construction, and specifically post-tension construction, the way we've done it, it's beneficial in a seismic zone if you can get it right. It's tricky, but we have designed this particular product to be able to stack up to 6 stories with no external bracing, which is very unusual, especially for a modular project and one of that height. And so it can go together very rapidly in a seismic zone. You could use the same product in a different state. We likely just wouldn't need all of the columns, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Right now, there's 8 columns per unit. You probably will only need to connect the corner columns in a state that doesn't have the same seismicity.
That makes a lot of sense. But are you focused on California as your market for now?
It's our launch market. We're focused anywhere on the West Coast. And you are right in that modular is permitted differently in every state. But most states permit modular at the state level rather than per small municipality. And so the benefit is the same product we're using in Los Angeles, we can use anywhere in California. And it's permitted through private agencies in our case, which is also the case in, I think, more than 40 states, where the state farms it out to private agencies to really specialize in this manufactured housing division.
Interesting. I have to ask, why 600 square feet?
Oh, it's a great question. It's really driven by the dimensions that would make the cost and constructability and shipping logistics most efficient in our minds. That is something that changes from state to state and from highway to highway, because different roads have different regulations. Even within the same state, different highways allow different widths on the trailer for different costs. So ours was driven around this. For us, it's like, how do we get the 80% or 90%? And what we decided was to keep it under 15 feet wide, even with all of the wrapping and the tarping on a truck, and to keep it at a length that was kind of just in that sweet spot where there's the greatest number of trucks available. They certainly can drive a 75-foot module on a truck, and there are a lot of wood modular companies that are doing 75 feet long so that they can get 2 apartments in one with the corridor. That restricts the type of building you can design, but it also does make the logistics quite challenging.
Oh, yeah, I imagine. Yeah, 75 is
And,
long.
while there are trucks that can do that, there's only so many and you run out of them. And so you don't want your project being a slave to what the shipping industry has available. We wanted it to be something that could ship on the most widely available fleets.
Okay.
And so that's how we landed. And we wanted a livable space. We didn't want an 8-foot wide container home. In our minds, that's not a livable space for most people.
Right. So you just launched. Do you have customers yet?
We do. We're very fortunate. So we launched the product, but we had already been working with a few developers, and both Nick and I have been in the industry quite a while. So we're fortunate to have a lot of goodwill. We have a signed letter of intent from a woman-owned developer.
Yay.
To do 200 plus units of workforce housing in the sort of north of Los Angeles, but in LA County, in a city called Lancaster. And so we're just in the early stages of conceptualizing. It's a 10-acre site. So we're in the early stages of conceptualizing how that lays out.
It's a great first LOI to have. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what's your goal for 2023 and 2 years from now and 5 years from now? How do you get to the 1,000 homes at a time? I suppose with 5 of those projects, right? And you're done.
I would love to be serving projects of all size. I would love for infill developers with 10 units to understand that they can get the benefit of this, whereas they may not be able to get the benefit of most modular because you need a bigger scale or a bigger order. But by ordering a product that a company like Cassette has already prototyped, has already put the R&D into, you don't need to add that to your pro forma. And so maybe now it pencils for you. And maybe now we can scale that and make an impact across the industry with that as a product, as opposed to being a custom fab shop that kind of starts from zero every time.
Interesting. So I did talk to you once before, and I was sort of really interested by the statement that you made that your hope is that eventually the costs will go down for each cassette, not up.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, why else would we do this, right?
Yes.
I mean,
To make a lot of money, not
why else
to bring costs down.
Yeah, I mean, making money is important, but there's certainly easier ways to make money than starting a really complicated business. So I could have stayed in an executive job. I could have done that. Life is precious. And I think a lot of us get to a certain point in life where we try to align the things that we know how to do and make money with the things that really matter. And that moment sort of came for me. And my ability to think through that sort of came a few years ago. And that's how Cassette came about. All of a sudden, I forgot your question.
I suppose it's how do you differentiate yourself in the marketplace? But also, I remember you saying that your ultimate goal was to drive the cost of each pod down.
Yeah.
Purely because you're not offering customized options.
Yeah, it gets down to a few years ago when I was leaning into industrialized construction. It wasn't just because it was the hot new thing. It was because I had spent 10 years in the manufacturing sector before I was in architecture and construction. And what I saw happening in prefab was not really manufacturing. And now there's such an interest both from cities and the investment community in what prefabrication can do, because there's this thought that, wow, manufacturing gets cheaper every year, right? We get better and better. We are so far advanced in manufacturing in terms of productivity improvement that it is basically at the top of all other industries when it comes to productivity gains per year. And construction is pretty much dead last on that list. And in fact, we've probably lost productivity in the last 20 years for a lot of reasons. Some of them good reasons for safety reasons, but some of them not so good reasons. So there's this sort of understanding that there's an inevitability around industrializing this construction industry. Yet I think, manufacturing is a really complex business, especially complex manufacturing, which would be more like automotive or aerospace. It's not like manufacturing, say, a widget that has one plastic tooling form and then you amortize that form, like we're making plastic cups. It's like you have 50 different sub-assemblies inside of this product that are sub-assembled by different, call it mechanical, electrical, plumbing sub-assemblies, et cetera. So it's complex manufacturing. Yet if you look since the 30s, complex manufacturing, it's been measured that for every time you double the number of units you make, there is a constant savings and there is a curve of efficiency and savings associated. But that is when you're doubling the same unit over and over. That is something that the way that most developers are buying modular construction, it's still not happening. Even if you have 100 units in your building, that's barely enough for a factory to start understanding how to build that product. And those savings they do come a little bit from material aggregate, but Katera proved that just having big volume doesn't get the cost down the way that process improvement actually gets the cost down, which is the primary driver of cost savings in manufacturing, is this process improvement. So we thought, okay, how do we create a process that really could be the same every time, all the way through installing the product? And so that's sort of the target. And the answer to your goal is, I want to get this one product to 1,000 and start to measure that curve. And what is that constant savings for every doubling? Because then we have a way of predicting how the cost will come down. And then we have a reason to launch a second product and a third product.
So you also will have to probably, I'm assuming, scale your manufacturing operations. I don't know where you're manufacturing right now, but how do you expect that to change over the next few years as these numbers go up?
That's exactly true. And so the business was designed around scaling manufacturing from the start. And so we actually have 2 agreements right now. We have 2 manufacturing hubs, and we're bringing a third one online, and they're all in different places. To have some diversification, to have scalability, but also have geographic diversification, sort of what's best for this project, where should these come from? And then building the back end. One of our goals in 2023 is starting to build what they call an ERP system in product, where you start to really have control and data on every single material that goes into that product, and to be able to move that material and supply database across your different hubs of where you're manufacturing it.
Interesting. So where did the inspiration for this come from?
Oh boy, I don't think it was sort of a sudden inspiration. It was really more of a leaning in. It started with the hypothesis that manufacturing should work in construction, specifically around multifamily, because you have the ability to do the same thing over and over. It's a lot harder in this country to do that with single family. That's a whole other conversation. But I thought it should work. I'm going to lean into this. And for about a year, I traveled around the world. I talked to different manufacturers, and not just of modular, but different forms of prefabrication, from CLT to panelized housing to volumetric. And in Asia, there's a lot of volumetric that's been going on for decades, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked a lot of people in the US who've been doing these projects. And so it was really a leaning in that led to just a lot of observations and questions. And one day I wrote a business plan. I thought, there's something I see that I don't think other people see. And as I started speaking about it, there were large companies and partners that were very interested right away in working with me.
Another question I have is we know that buildings are responsible for probably about 40% of tainting our environment, our world. How does this process help, or does it help?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most exciting parts about this is that the construction is also one of the most wasteful industries
Very wasteful.
when you think about things that are thrown in a landfill and a dumpster.
That's beyond the 40% emission number, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
Yeah.
from a sustainability perspective, there's been some measurement. Obviously, I'm not big enough and don't have the track record yet to start measuring our specific business around it. But the early studies, at least in the UK, and I think now in Canada, have shown something like 70% less carbon emissions just from less trucks to the site.
That's what I was going to say. You've got one truck run instead of like probably hundreds, right?
I believe you have to be really honest and say, okay, well, then you also have to measure trucks to your manufacturing hub. And so
Mm-hmm.
people get very concerned about having a manufacturing site maybe where they think it should be. But what I would say from a sustainability perspective is the biggest thing you want to make sure is that all the suppliers are in close proximity to that manufacturing hub.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're, and we have a manufacturing hub in Korea. We have a partner in Singapore. We're working on a couple in North America right now. But the bigger important piece of that is designing the product and supply chain that goes into that manufacturing and making sure that that doesn't have a big distance to travel and that that's a sustainable material.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it to really be sustainable rather than to just get points on a board, it makes you think about a lot of different things. And it's one of the things I think we're most excited to start measuring from day one is how do we benchmark our carbon emissions? And then over time, how do we improve that?
Yes. Fascinating. So, what's standing in the way of producing housing like this? What's making it harder for you, harder than it should be?
Yeah, harder for us versus harder for the industry, maybe two different things. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
are like a lot of women-owned businesses.
Oh, well, that's hard right there.
Yeah, that started a pandemic. I'm not complaining, but we've bootstrapped, and that's just a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's my optimism. I don't think things are standing in our way. I think there's a lot of capital markets that don't understand how to calculate a risk of something that's very new. And so that's not just me, that's the modular industry facing industries like banking and insurance that are not incentivized to take risks, right? So changing things in that industry usually takes a crazy amount of capital to be able to guarantee loans and those things. So that's one of the obstacles to the industry, but it's softening. And then what I would say is the bigger obstacle, and this is the less talked about obstacle, is this culture of custom start from scratch. And even a lot of architects are looking at prefabrication and saying, oh, I want mass customization. And what I would say is, well, you haven't even figured out how to make the industrialization work. Great, let's get to mass customization. I love that. The contractor I worked for built the Broad Museum and the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures and every kind of iconic, like one-off unique thing and using 3D technology, and it's all great. But that's not where construction started. And that's not where prefab and modular needs to start. We need to start by understanding that when I build a project as a developer and a general contractor, my typical process involves 80 different stakeholders down the chain, from the lender to the plumber on site to the neighborhood to the permitting agency. There's a lot of people involved in this process. And the crazy part about what we do is that every time you develop a new project, you change all 80 of those entities, or maybe like 75 of them are different every time. And so if you're going to say, like I do, that cost savings over time comes from process improvement, how in the heck is that going to happen when you have a different 80 companies doing that process every time?
Right.
And so I'm trying to sort of cordon off this 50 to 70% of what you're doing to make sure we can have a repeatable process for you. But what that means for everybody else is that I need to make sure that my product is actually created in a way that's simple enough that I can teach it to a very fragmented industry and they can quickly get it every time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the obstacles is this sort of desire to customize everything and not really respect and understand the investment that goes into creating a product in a manufacturing environment. But I do believe that just by showing the industry that a beautiful product can be created and it has a fixed price, and you could actually know exactly what you're getting for the price you're getting it, which is unheard of in construction, that developers will buy that. If you build it, they will come. And that's what we're starting to experience. And it's hopefully that will be transformative in the industry when that starts to happen.
Well, I feel like I've missed some questions somewhere. Is there anything else you want to tell us? It's a fascinating business.
I feel like I've been talking too much, and I'd like to know more about you, actually. And
Well, that's not what this is about, but we can talk about that later. It's really fascinating. What's next for you? I mean, what do you have to do over the next 3 months to keep this going and keep building it?
yeah, well, we're set on executing perfectly, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that want to get a lot of projects. I want to get our first project in the ground and have the project work the way we've promised, and to keep our word and to measure it. And we're fortunate enough to have at least one customer that wants to move forward and work with this system. And I think our job is to just execute well. So that's my goal. I believe everything else falls into place from that.
Well, I can't wait to see it. Thank you very much for joining me. It sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's guest and our deep dive. You can find out more about this episode or others you might have missed on the show notes page at rethinkrealestateforgood.co. There's lots to listen to there. You can support this podcast by sharing it with others, posting about it on social media, or leaving a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Even better, if you're ready to dabble in some impact investing yourself, head on over to wefunder.com/small change, where you can invest directly in small change and our mission to democratize capital formation to create impact in commercial real estate development. A special thanks to David Allardyce for his excellent editing of this podcast and original music. And a big thanks to you for spending your time with me today. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change. Thank you.